gonna win, Twins, we're gonna score. We're gonna win, Twins, watch that baseball soar. Crack out a home run, shout a hip hooray. Cheer for the Minnesota Twins today.
Hello and welcome to Mary's Eclectic Interest. I'm your host, Charlie Brose. With me today, I'm with Bob Showers, who has a new book on the Twins in the Dome. It's a follow-up to The Twins at the Met. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, Charlie, thanks for having me.
Tell us how the book came about here, Bob.
Well, basically my love and passion for Minnesota Twins baseball. I produced my first book a number of years ago on Minnesota North Stars history with Lou Nanne. After learning the book Building Business, I went into production on a second book, which was Twins history at Metropolitan Stadium, the Twins at the Met. So this was kind of a natural third sequel to focus on the buildings and the teams that no longer exist. So to do a book on Twins history in the Metrodome was a lot of fun.
Well, I hope in 20 years we're not talking about Twins at Target Field. So,
I think that one might be around a lot longer than 20 years.
I hope so. Tell us about, well, there's some quirks about the old Dome Stadium that, you know, some of the Twins call their own secrets. Let's learn about those a little bit here.
Yeah, everybody remembers the white roof and the white baseball and balls getting lost and how it made for so many weird doubles, roof doubles as they called them. But it also gave the Twins a certain home field advantage, some of the little quirks and secrets that they learned about. And when I did my interviews with Torrey Hunter and Ken Hrbek, I first gathered lots of great photos from the Twins archives. The Twins gave me total access to their photo archive and then helped set up my interviews with a lot of the legendary Dome era players of the Twins. And so first thing I did was gather these photos, and then in my interviews I had the guys go through the photos and just kind of start reacting and responding and reminiscing based on those photos that they were seeing as a way of letting the photos evoke the memories more than just asking questions that they always get asked. And with those photos and looking back at the ceiling and the different things about the dome, they did tell me some inner secrets that they knew that the opposition didn't know. And first and foremost was Torrey Hunter commented upon the air pressure in the dome and how the maintenance crew of the Metrodome in the seventh inning of the games would open up those doors to the outside. So as you would exit the dome, you would have the revolving doors, but there was also those normal pushed doors that would create that huge suction that would just blow you out. Well, in the seventh inning of games, the crew at the dome would basically adjust the level of the air pressure by opening up those doors. Well, Torrey said they found out that caused a real jet stream pushing toward right field in the baggy area of the dome. So what they learned was when you're up in the seventh inning, take everything to right field. And Torrey said there could be a pitch coming at my neck, and I was going to try to inside out that ball out to the right field line and get that thing carrying. Likewise, the pitchers, when they would face opposing batters, if it was a lefty, they made sure they didn't give him anything he could pull. A little righty, they didn't want him anything outside the plate that they could take the opposite way. So they knew when that seventh inning came around, that was their time to shut the opposition down and then to take their balls to right field and have some big innings come from that. And Ken Hrbek talked about a blind spot that was out in right center field that they were very much aware of, where not just the coloration, the white of the roof, but the way the lights were set up, it caused a very difficult situation for the right fielder and the second baseman for any pop-up into short right field. So Kent said they were always aware of that and made sure that they called out those balls. And Kent said I had to run out a lot of times and help out the second baseman and right fielder more so than usual. But offensively, when they were on base, they knew if it was a little short fly into right field, they could take a little extra room away from the base, knowing that there's a good chance that ball may drop, and they wanted to have that little bit of a head start to advancing on another base rather than maybe staying a little closer to the bag. So things like that went above and beyond just getting balls lost in the roof were things that they learned that they could use to their advantage.
So it created what came to be known as the dome field advantage.
The dome field advantage, yeah. I was interviewing Tim Loudner, and he talked about a series that they had with the Kansas City Royals. And the Royals had a catcher named John Wathen who was a decent hitter.
Okay.
And Timmy said that Loudner during this series had just been hitting the hide off the ball. And Wathen had come up, and George Brett, the great George Brett, was on deck behind Wathen. Wathen had a 3-2 count. Timmy said they threw him a slider and it wound up being ball 4. They didn't want to give him anything too good to hit.
Right.
Wathen walks. The next day, Wathen came up to Tim in batting practice and said, with Brett on deck, why on earth did you throw me a breaking ball? Why didn't you just give me something to hit, wanting to face me instead of Brett? Well, Tim said they knew that George Brett hated to hit in the Metrodome because it was tough for left-handed hitters because there was a bank of lights in the outfield that bothered left-handed hitters, but George Brett in particular, the way he took his batting stance, that bank of lights really bothered him, and they knew that George Brett hated hitting in the dome.
It made it more difficult for him to see the ball.
Extremely difficult. And so Timmy said that's what he told John Wathen. If we were in Royal Stadium, we'd have never walked you. But up here, we knew how bad Brett hated to hit here. We'd rather take our chances with him.
Right, because probably his numbers showed that he was the worst hitter in the dome there.
Exactly. So little things like that.
Little thing that does
they
help.
could pick up on. Yeah.
What were some of the greater things that happened in the dome there? I mean, I know we had 2 World Series and we had the homecoming. What can you tell us about those events?
Well, they're iconic.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly to say that welcome home rally occurred after the Twins had defeated the Detroit Tigers at Tiger Stadium to advance to the World Series, and that was Monday, October 12. And that came about very spontaneously. I interviewed Bill Lester, a man who ran the Met Sports Commission and was kind of the landlord, if you want to call it that, of the Metrodome. And he and a Twins employee, Mark Weber, both grew up in small towns. Mark was from Chisholm, Minnesota, and Bill grew up in Montana, a small town in Montana. And they were talking the day before that playoff win for the Twins, how small towns, when teams would go to the state high school tournaments and be victorious, when they would come back, there would always be a big reception in the gymnasium. And they kind of wanted to see if they could replicate that kind of feel if the Twins were to win in Detroit. And of course, that next day, the Twins beat the Tigers 9-5 to advance on to the World Series. And so they decided very hastily, let's throw something together in the Metrodome to welcome the team back that Monday night. They anticipated 15,000. And Bill said they arranged for security for as many as 20,000. And as we all know by now, the place was packed with over 60,000 people.
So they were quite overwhelmed with
They were
what
caught
happened.
extremely off guard. The dome back then had gates that were like, he called them the scissor gates, that would block off certain areas of the concourse.
Oh, yes.
They only had so many sections that were available for fans, but as people started pouring in, he said they were constantly opening more and more sections in those scissor gates, and he said we could barely get those gates open before there was just this rush of people to get in there. So it was all very spontaneous and something that totally caught the players off guard. You know, by now we've heard a lot of the players talk about the thrill that they felt when that big garage door opened after the bus arrived and they walked out and saw the place so packed. But Kent Hrbek was telling me about what it was like on the airplane when they were flying back and they were enjoying some celebratory cocktails on the plane. Kent said we were all half in the bag and no one was expecting that they were going to get off the airplane and have to get on a bus and go down to the dome. Everyone had their cars right there, and they thought they'd just be heading home. He said we sobered up real quick by about the time the police came to escort us into the dome. So for all the people that were there, it's certainly something that they'll never forget, and the players have a very warm feeling about it.
Kind of an overwhelming feeling for the players.
Absolutely.
Now, as we spoke earlier, it sounds though that kind of celebration was cut short by the skipper there with Tom Kelly.
Yeah, I asked Kent if there was an after party, you know, to celebrate their going to the World Series, because at the time the Giants and the Cardinals, who were battling out for the National League pennant, they had a few games yet to play, so the Twins weren't going to have to go right into the World Series. I asked Kent, did you guys meet up someplace afterwards to carry on with the celebration? He said, no, for 2 reasons we didn't. Number one, he said we were all just dead tired. He said, but furthermore, Tom Kelly had scheduled practice for 10 o'clock the next morning. And when I spoke with Tom Kelly for the book and asked him about that, He said the guys were pretty excited, and rightfully so, about advancing to the World Series, and then this welcome rally had everybody just on cloud nine and beyond. He said, it was very important for me to get their heads back on straight and to get their focus back on baseball, because we still had a huge task in front of us with the World Series. He said, that's why I called practice for the next morning at 10 o'clock, because I wanted to get these guys zeroed back in on the task of the World Series.
There was still work to be done.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and as they progressed into that World Series, do we have any feedback from the players, the experiences that they had, and even the after effects of the World Series?
Yeah, I'll go back to Kent and TK for a couple things that were real poignant. As most folks may remember, the Twins' dugout was lower than the level in the dome where their locker room, clubhouse, and things were.
Sure.
There were 44 stairs that led them from the clubhouse level down into the dugout. And in those years prior to the World Series, Kent said that those stairs just became hated. 44 stairs. They knew how many stairs there were. He said nobody even wanted to wear the number 44 because they hated those 44 stairs, those steps so much, whether it was going down or going back up. But Kent said it was game one of that World Series when they were getting ready to go down to the dugout, to get onto the field and begin things. With each step, as they got closer and closer down toward the dugout, the noise level from the fans kept coming up and louder with each step as they were descending down. He said suddenly that stairwell just took on a completely different vibe. No one hated it anymore. All of a sudden it was this feeling of euphoria and goosebumps. And
so they fed into the enthusiasm of the crowd.
yeah, he said we'd never heard the Dome that loud. Obviously, the years leading up to that, nothing near to that had happened.
Got louder through seven games.
So that stairwell became a source of great pride and sense of accomplishment. And certainly after winning the World Series, it became legendary. And talking to Tom Kelly about the World Series, he touched on some things that had nothing to do with the games on the field themselves, but afterwards. He told me that he always kept up with his fan mail. He wanted to make sure he was very persistent and diligent in keeping up with his fan mail. And about a week after the World Series was over, he started getting fan mail that was generated post-World Series. So a lot of congratulatory notes and things of that nature. But he said he received 7 or 8 letters from gals, a few from men, that were almost identical in their tone and their content. And these were coming from folks that were saying how much the playoff run against Detroit and the World Series against the Cardinals meant to them because they were having trouble with their marriage. They were on the verge of a possible divorce. And the thrill of that month of baseball, the playoffs and the World Series, brought them and their spouse back together. He said these letters almost sounded identical in the description of how my husband and I started doing things together again. We watched these games together. We pulled for the Twins together. We were emotional into these games together again like we hadn't been for so long. Maybe they hadn't been talking for so long, but they sat down and would watch these games and go through the ups and the downs and the emotions. And all these letters ended by saying, we're trying to save our marriage now because of what you guys did. And Tom Kelly just said it blew him away because he said, as ball players, we go through our 9 innings. We have our jobs to do. He says, you don't always stop and think about how that 9-inning period of time affects other people. So real poignant.
It became a bonding effect for these couples that were struggling.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So.
And you mentioned something more about the meeting with certain other community agencies.
Tom said that it was a few days after the World Series. He was in his office at the Dome and received a call from the Minneapolis chief of police and requesting a meeting with Tom Kelly the next day. And TK said he got off the phone call and thought, this can't be good. You know, what happened with one of my players? Anytime you get a call from the chief of police, something has happened. So he contacted Andy McPhail, the Twins GM at the time, and Andy said, I'll look into this and get back to you. Subsequent to that, TK got a call from the chief of police in St. Paul requesting a meeting as well. So the next day, TK is in his office. The Minneapolis chief, the St. Paul chief show up in their full dress uniforms, along with a few other police chiefs from local suburbs.
Sure.
And they came in, and somewhat to the same degree as those letters, they came in and just wanted to thank TK and the Twins for the wonderful vibe and environment that the playoff run and the World Series had created in the Twin Cities. And they came prepared with graphs of going back the last 10 to 12 years in the month of October and looking at crime rates of domestic assaults and DUIs and felonies and things like that, how previous October the crime rates were such, and then this past October that they had just come off of, those crime rates all dropped significantly, and these police officers said it was all due to the wonderful feeling that the Twins created in bringing the community together and just getting people in such a positive frame of mind that all these crime rates dropped. So again, TK said this stuff just blew him away.
It showed the effect of a championship season on the community that, you know, the Twins really had no idea that they were creating.
Yeah, and no one had an idea for that up to that point. That was our first championship in the Twin Cities, so it was.
Well, yeah,
it was,
we'd had other opportunities. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, for failed field Super Bowl. We won't go into that.
Yeah.
What and then now we progressed on to the '91 World Series, and was there a different vibe or feeling among the players during that World Series, or what do we know about that?
Well, a lot of them, speak about how nothing can compare to that first World Series thrill, the 44 steps and the homer hankies and all of that. But then it was the added pressure of you've won one. You want to keep that feeling. You don't want to experience the feeling of losing. So, and there was, the 7 guys that were on both of those teams. So they were able to have a core group of players that were on both of those teams who could carry that feeling forward.
Okay.
And 7 games, and in both instances, we won the home games and lost the road games. So it goes back to the dome field advantage and the noise and the things of that nature that helped us out.
And it wasn't without controversy. I mean, you had the Kent Hrbek play, and
With Ron Gant.
With Ron Gant, and you had spoken to the umpire, who was the first base umpire at that game.
Well, I spoke with Don Dankinger, who was the crew chief of the '91 World Series. He was, during that game, down the right field line, but I did talk to him about that play. And, Kent has always made the assertion, and rightfully so, that if Gant had come back and slid into that bag, his momentum doesn't carry him past the bag. And Kent has said, Gant approached that like a kid in Little League who just runs straight to a base and then overruns it. And that was the momentum with which Kent just slapped the tag on and let everything kind of just fall.
As long as he held that tag.
Fall over. And so when I spoke with Don Dankinger, the umpire, he pretty much reiterated what Kent had to say, that it's the base runner's responsibility to stay on that bag.
Okay.
And Gant didn't do that, and it was quite clear to the umpire at first base at the time, Drew Coble, that it was Gant's over-aggressiveness that carried his body off balance into Hrbek, and Hrbek is totally within his rights to slap that tag on and hold it. So as much as it looked like one of Kent's famous wrestling moves, that wasn't the case. Kent went on to have a pretty rough go of it down in Atlanta, because that happened in Game 2, and then we had the next 3 games down in Atlanta. Kent told me that the FBI and Secret Service got involved because he got a number of death threats, as did his mom.
Wow.
And so when he was down in Atlanta, Kent said normally he would do his pregame stretching in the dugout, but due to the nature of a World Series, so many more media and security people in the dugout, he said he went out to left field to do his pregame stretching. None of his teammates got anywhere near him. They all knew that he had these death threats and the FBI was involved. So Kent said, I was kind of sitting out there stretching all by myself. If the bullets started popping, none of the other guys wanted to be anywhere near me. So.
Yeah, I can't blame him there, but that's got to be a scary feeling for him to have that kind of experience. And, it's just a game.
Yeah. Kent went on to say, to this day, if he has a flight that has a connection through Atlanta, he books a different flight. He says, to this day, I don't want to go through Atlanta.
He's not stopping in Atlanta. Now, I realize you never had a chance to interview Kirby about that. But did any of the players have any feedback about the Game 6 home run that took him to Game 7 and Jack Morris and his wonderful performance?
Well, Kirby was such a great leader by example, that nobody was surprised that it was Kirby was the guy that said, "Hey, get on my back."
Right.
That quote that is so famous and perfect for Kirby. But it was Tom Kelly that talked about the locker room after that. How it kind of goes back to the welcome rally. He said when we got back up in the locker room, he said guys were going crazy. He said they were just going crazy. In particular, he talked about Chuck Knobloch. He said he was jumping around like the Energizer Bunny, that they were all so excited. He said Tom Kelly did. It was a big task for him right then and there to get the guys calmed down because of what lied ahead with Game 7.
They still had one more game to play.
Yeah, so Jack Morris had such a calming influence when the guys walked in and knew that Jack was going to be taking the ball for Game 7, but they were still so keyed up from Kirby's home run that it took a little doing on TK's part.
Now, did you ever have a chance to talk to Jack about Game 7?
I did not. I talked to him with the Met Stadium book, of all things, because Jack grew up in the Twin Cities and grew up as a Twins fan and then pitched out at the Met. So he had some fun things to talk about with Metropolitan Stadium. But,
and when he was pitching there, he was pitching for the Tigers at the time.
That's right, yeah. When I did the interviews with the guys, aside from the photos that we talked about, I was able to get the headshot of each of the players from the Dome era, and there were over 400 from the years 1982 to 09. That's the seasons that the Twins played in the Dome. So when I did my interviews, I had the guys go through those headshots, knowing that photos are a tremendous way of evoking memories. And so I wanted the guys to look at these photos and just start reminiscing and letting the stories just kind of come flying out. So
what are some of the best ones you received from that era?
It was fun to see the reaction that guys had, because you never knew what face might spark a fun memory or a fun story. But I think the big scoop that came out was the reaction from a couple of David Ortiz's closest teammates. Of course, David was let go from the Twins after the 2004 season.
Right.
And after being unemployed for a number of months, which he doesn't talk about, he tries to make it seem like he went straight to the Red Sox. But after sitting unemployed for a few months, he signed with the Red Sox and became the
the force that he became,
sure Hall of Famer that he is today. And he never ceased to take pot shots at the Twins, and Tom Kelly in particular, for wanting to be a spray hitter and take the ball the other way. And it wasn't until he got to the Red Sox that he was allowed to be a pull hitter and hit home runs. And he has continually just talked about how thrilled he was to leave the Twins because he didn't blossom as a ball player until he left the Twins. Right. But when I was interviewing Torrey Hunter, I was real curious as to Torrey's reaction when he got to the David Ortiz photo, and I was a bit surprised when Torrey talked about the day that Ortiz was released from the Twins. Ortiz received a call from Terry Ryan releasing him, and Torrey said the first thing Ortiz did was call Torrey.
Okay.
And Torrey said he got on the phone with Ortiz, and Ortiz was crying and saying, "How did this happen? What did I do wrong? Is there anything I can do to change this?"
Okay.
And I thought, wow, that's not what we've been hearing from Ortiz. Ortiz has been telling anybody and everybody that will listen how happy he was to leave the Twins, because as a ball player, he didn't felt that he was being treated properly. And then I interviewed Corey Koski. Corey was also part of that core group of Twins in those years and was a close friend of Ortiz. And Corey told me that a few weeks after the season ended, Ortiz got married. They were all down at Ortiz's wedding. And during the wedding reception, this was a few weeks prior to being released, so Corey said David kind of knew the writing on the wall. He could see the writing on the wall, knew that he was probably going to be released. At this wedding reception, Ortiz got up to address his teammates that were there. He said he started bawling like a baby, saying, "I'm going to miss you guys so much. I'm going to miss you guys so much. I wish I didn't have to leave." So quite different from the narrative that Ortiz has been telling for all these years. So I was interested to see if Torrey and Corey Koski might want me to hold those stories back from the book, but pleased to say they wanted those to be printed.
Yet Ortiz has his own book that he kind of contradicts what those two say.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad in that respect that he chose maybe to just turn away from his friends at the time.
Yeah, but who knows what goes on?
We've got a couple minutes left. What other experiences? I know we had, another 6 years in the Dome, 28 years, and was there anything that came out of those last years that was interesting or compelling from those teams?
Well, aside from the teams, one thing that was compelling that a lot of folks may have experienced were some of the rock concerts that were there.
Oh, yes.
And in particular, the first concert that was there, which was Bob Dylan, the Grateful Dead, and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Okay.
And if any of the viewers that were there know exactly what we're talking about, was the sound was so horrible.
Right.
And not just for the folks in the crowd, but Bob Dylan on stage was complaining about this reverb that he was getting from his music. Jerry Garcia made the comment that he couldn't tell if he was hearing his echo or his amp because the sound was so bad.
Sure.
So it was in my interview with Bill Lester, who ran the Dome, I wanted to find out from him what caught them off guard so much that for the sound to be so bad and for them to not be aware of it. And,
Sure.
and that concert was in June of '86, so the Dome had been open for 4 years before that first show. And Bill pointed out that in those first years, the suites of the Dome had plexiglass in front of them.
Okay.
And he said what caught them off guard was, as the stage would be set up on what would be like the end zone of a football field and shooting down, it was bouncing off that plexiglass and the sound was coming back. So that's what was causing that 10-second reverb.
Okay.
So that was, first and foremost, the big problem. Everything just sounded very muddy to the people in the crowd. My wife happened to be at that show. Some real close friends of mine were there, and they just say you couldn't make out anything that the band was singing. And the way that they solved this was 2 years later, the next show was Pink Floyd. And Bill said Pink Floyd came in with a sound tech who was this genius. First thing they did was they got rid of the plexiglass, but this Pink Floyd sound technician set up a series of speakers throughout the width and length of the Dome, so it wasn't just speakers set up on the stage, but relay speakers sending the sound at the same time throughout the Dome. And so that
created a more even sound throughout the building.
Sound. Yeah, it was never Carnegie Hall, but it created a much better sound. And for people that were in subsequent shows there, you mentioned going to the Genesis show. I saw the Stones and a number of shows there myself. The sound was never great. How good can it be when you're dealing with an inflatable
But they were able to
roof?
replicate kind of what the Pink Floyd group did.
Yeah, get things a little more back to,
Yeah,
to concert quality, as
And I
good
heard
as it could
you
be.
mentioned that the Pink Floyd guy was kind of a sound genius, as it were.
Yeah, that's the way Bill said. You look at this guy, he didn't think he probably had two pennies to rub together, but he knew his sound. So a lot of fun memories in that building, not just Twins related, but
No, there were a lot of great shows there as well.
Hall of Famers coming through there. And I got great pictures in the book of Eddie Van Halen on stage, and David Gilmour, Keith Richards, and Jerry Garcia. So
It did. It sounds like a great book. Bob, I really do want to congratulate you.
Thank you. We're just scratching the surface.
And, if you come up with another new book, you let us know and come on down.
You bet I will. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. I'm Charlie Brose. This has been Mary's Eclectic Interest. Tune in next time. Thank you.
When the Senators stopped playing ball, the Twin Cities got the call. Minnesota joined the American League. With Mealy at the reins, the Twins made instant gains. In '65, they had the flag and an MVP. I'm talking baseball. Allison and Perry twins. Baseball. Kitty Cott and Jerry. Don Mincher and Mudcat coming through. Jimmy Hall and Davy Boswell too, just like Tony, the Killer and Carew.